There are some stories that live only in the quiet corners of your mind, tucked away like pressed flowers in a forgotten book. They're too fragile to share, too raw to speak aloud, and yet they shape you in ways nothing else ever could. This is one of those stories. It's not grand or dramatic in the way movies are, but it was, for me, everything. It was a tremor that ran through the very foundation of my life, a secret symphony played only for two. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm 42 years old, and for most of my life, I've considered myself predictable, stable. My days unfolded with a comforting rhythm in our small suburban town, the scent of coffee brewing at 6:30 a.m., the school run, then the drive to the marketing firm where I'd worked for 15 years. Evenings were a familiar blend of homework, dinner, and the quiet hum of family life. My world was neatly arranged, like the carefully curated shelves in my living room. And then he arrived. It was a Tuesday morning, a dreary November day, the kind where the sky hangs low and gray, promising nothing but more rain. Our firm, Synergy Solutions, was a tight-knit place. We knew each other's coffee orders, our kids' names, and the quiet hum of unspoken office politics. Change was rare and usually met with a collective sigh, but this time it was different. Lucas, our new senior creative director, walked in and it felt as though someone had suddenly opened a window, letting in a gust of crisp, unexpected air. He wasn't a jarring presence, not loud or flashy, quite the opposite. He was quiet, almost reserved, with a thoughtful intensity that drew you in without demanding it. He had kind eyes, the color of warm hazel, framed by laugh lines that hinted at a deeper, more joyful spirit beneath his calm exterior. He wore well-tailored shirts, nothing ostentatious, but they fit him perfectly, speaking of an understated elegance. I remember the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence, and the way he smiled, a slow, genuine curve of his lips that reached his eyes. My first interaction with him was entirely professional. He'd been assigned to a new ad campaign for a local organic grocery chain, and I was the lead account manager. We sat across a polished oak table in the conference room, surrounded by mood boards and competitor analysis reports. He listened more than he spoke, absorbing every detail, asking insightful questions that cut straight to the core of the client's needs. I remember the way his gaze held mine as I explained our initial strategy, a focused attention that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't a flirtatious look, not at all. It was something far more potent, genuine interest, intelligent engagement. And in that moment, something within me, a tiny, forgotten chord, vibrated. Over the next few weeks, our professional collaboration deepened.
We spent countless hours together, huddled over laptops, brainstorming ideas, fine-tuning copy, dissecting market trends. The office hummed around us, phones ringing, keyboards clattering, the murmur of colleagues' conversations. But often, it felt like Lucas and I were in our own quiet bubble. We found a rhythm, an almost telepathic understanding in our work. I'd suggest an idea, and he'd instantly grasp its potential, expanding on it in a way that felt like we were completing each other's sentences. We started having lunch together occasionally, just the two of us, often in the small, slightly neglected break room, or sometimes grabbing sandwiches from the deli down the street. It began innocently enough, born out of convenience and the need to discuss ongoing projects. But slowly, imperceptibly, our conversations drifted beyond work. We talked about books we'd read, the old movies we loved, the simple pleasures of a quiet Sunday morning. He spoke about his life with a gentle openness, mentioning a daughter, Clara, with such warmth in his voice that it painted a vivid picture of a devoted father. He didn't elaborate much on his wife, just a passing mention of my wife Sarah, which I took to mean a stable, happy partnership. I, in turn, spoke of my husband, Daniel, and our two children, Lily and Ben, trying to project an image of contentment that, even then, felt a little brittle around the edges. But it was in the silences that the true tension began to brew. There were moments, after we'd finished discussing a complex ad concept, or while waiting for the elevator, when a comfortable quiet would settle between us. Not an awkward silence, but one that felt pregnant with unspoken understanding. In those moments, I would sometimes catch his eye, and something would pass between us. A flicker, a recognition that felt too intimate for a colleague.
My heart would give a strange little lurch, a skip in its familiar rhythm. I'd quickly look away, focusing on the scuff marks on my shoes or the pattern of the carpet, trying to tell myself it was nothing, just a trick of the light, an overactive imagination. But the feeling persisted. Every time he walked into a room, I felt something shift, a subtle recalibration of the air around me. My senses would heighten, becoming acutely aware of his presence, the faint scent of his cologne, the sound of his footsteps, the low timbre of his voice. I found myself anticipating his arrival in the mornings, feeling a quiet disappointment if he was running late. I'd make an extra cup of coffee, just in case he walked by my desk right then, as if the shared ritual of a morning brew could anchor this nascent, unsettling connection. My internal conflicts began almost immediately. I was a married woman, a mother. I loved my husband Daniel in the steady, comfortable way you love a familiar landscape. We had built a life together, brick by painstaking brick.
The thought of feeling anything outside of that steady affection for another man was not just foreign, it was deeply disturbing. Guilt would wash over me in waves, cold and sharp. I'd replay moments in my head, dissecting every glance, every laugh, searching for an innocent explanation, for proof that I was imagining things. I started to monitor myself, censoring my words, my expressions. I'd pull back physically, subtly, if I felt we were getting too close, too comfortable. If our hands brushed over a document, I'd quickly retract mine. If he leaned in to show me something on his screen, I'd maintain a careful distance. But the harder I tried to create boundaries, the more intensely I felt the pull, like a tide against a fragile dam. The fear of judgment was a constant companion, not just from my colleagues or from Daniel, but from myself. What kind of woman was I becoming? This wasn't a crush, not in the superficial sense. This was deeper, more insidious. It was an emotional resonance that tapped into something starved within me, something I hadn't even realized was missing, until Lucas's quiet presence illuminated its absence. One evening, we were the last two in the office, finalizing a presentation for a big client meeting the next morning. The building was hushed, the only sounds the soft hum of the computers and the distant rumble of a city bus. We ordered takeout, cheap Chinese food that tasted surprisingly good in the late-night quiet. We ate across from each other, amidst scattered printouts and empty coffee cups. He told me a story about his daughter, Clara, who was obsessed with drawing fantastical creatures, and how he encouraged her imagination. His eyes sparkled as he spoke of her, a pure, unadulterated joy. I found myself hanging on every word, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the spicy noodles. Then he paused, looking at me. "You're a good listener, Emily," he said, his voice soft. "It's a rare quality." My heart fluttered. I felt a blush creep up my neck, despite myself. "Thank you," I managed, my voice a little breathless. "You too. You make it easy to talk." He smiled, that slow, genuine smile. "I feel the same way about you." The air between us thickened. It wasn't a romantic declaration, not explicitly, but it was an acknowledgement of the unique connection we shared, a fragile understanding that shimmered just beneath the surface of our professional roles. I knew I shouldn't feel this rush of exhilaration, this dizzying sense of being truly understood, but I did. Every fiber of my being resonated with that moment. I wanted to lean into it, to let the silence stretch and deepen, to see where it would lead. But the ingrained habits of a lifetime, the walls I had built around my heart, held me captive. I quickly shifted the conversation back to the presentation, my voice a little too loud, a little too brisk. The moment passed, leaving a faint, bittersweet echo.
Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The organic grocery campaign was a resounding success, earning us accolades and new clients. Lucas and I continued to work closely, our connection growing stronger, more intricate, like roots intertwining beneath the soil. We developed a shorthand, a way of communicating with just a look or a subtle gesture. I could tell when he was frustrated, even if he masked it with a calm demeanor. He seemed to sense my anxieties, often offering a quiet word of encouragement or a perfectly timed cup of tea. Our morning routines began to feel subtly altered. I started choosing my outfits with a little more care, not for vanity, but for a quiet sense of wanting to present my best self to him. I'd catch myself rehearsing a funny anecdote or an interesting observation, hoping to share it with him.
My husband, Daniel, bless his oblivious heart, barely noticed. Our conversations at home had become a practical exchange of information: school schedules, bills, grocery lists. The emotional landscape of our marriage had flattened into a comfortable plateau, and I hadn't even realized how much I missed the peaks and valleys until Lucas brought them back into view. One particularly stressful week, we were up against a tight deadline for a new tech client. We'd pulled an all-nighter, fueled by caffeine and sheer adrenaline. As dawn broke, painting the office windows with soft hues of pink and gold, we finally sent off the completed proposal. There was a moment of exhausted triumph, a shared sigh of relief. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples, and I felt a pang of something akin to tenderness watching him. "We did it," I whispered, my voice hoarse. He looked at me, his eyes tired but bright. "We make a good team, Emily." "The best," I agreed, a smile spreading across my face, genuine and unforced. He held my gaze then, for what felt like an eternity. The early morning light softened the edges of his face, making him seem both familiar and impossibly distant. In that prolonged silence, I felt the full weight of everything unspoken between us. It was a tangible presence, a humming energy. I wanted to reach out, to touch his hand, to somehow bridge the chasm that separated us. I wondered what he was thinking, what he felt. Did he feel this too, this electric current that pulsed beneath our polite exchanges? Or was I just projecting, manufacturing meaning where there was none? The question burned in my mind, a silent, agonizing flame. My moral dilemmas grew sharper, more insistent. I felt like I was living a double life. At home, I was the devoted wife and mother, performing my duties, participating in family rituals. But a significant part of my emotional landscape was occupied by Lucas. I'd find myself drifting during conversations with Daniel, my thoughts wandering to a subtle inflection in Lucas's voice, a particular way he had of tilting his head when he was deep in thought.
I'd feel a profound sense of guilt, a betrayal of the vows I'd made, even though nothing tangible had transpired. The betrayal was purely internal, a treason of the heart. I tried to rationalize it. It was just a strong professional bond, I told myself, a deep friendship. We connected on an intellectual and emotional level that was rare, and there was nothing wrong with that. But the truth was, it felt like something more, something dangerous and exhilarating. I knew I shouldn't feel that way, shouldn't crave his presence, shouldn't find such profound comfort in his company, but I did. The knowing and the feeling were in constant, painful opposition. The fear of judgment didn't just come from external sources anymore. It came from within. I judged myself harshly. I saw myself as weak, as susceptible, as someone who was venturing into territory that was sacred and forbidden. I tried to create distance, making excuses not to have lunch with him, or staying late after he'd left. But those efforts only made me feel lonelier, the office suddenly vast and empty without his familiar presence. The silence that had once been pregnant with unspoken meaning now felt hollow, an aching void. There was a company retreat one spring, a weekend getaway to a charming old inn nestled in the rolling hills a couple of hours outside of town. It was meant to foster team building, to get us all out of our usual environment. I dreaded it, and simultaneously, I longed for it. Away from the structured confines of the office, the boundaries felt even more precarious. The first evening, after a long day of workshops and awkward team-building exercises, everyone gathered in the inn's cozy lounge, drinks in hand. The atmosphere was relaxed, a little boisterous. Lucas and I gravitated towards each other naturally, finding a quiet corner near the fireplace. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. He told me about his childhood, growing up in a small town not unlike ours, about his dreams of being an architect before he fell into advertising. I found myself sharing things I hadn't voiced to anyone in years, my quiet longing for creative pursuits, the novel I had started writing years ago and abandoned, the feeling of being trapped by the expectations I'd set for myself. His gaze was steady, understanding. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer facile advice. He just listened, truly listened, and I felt utterly exposed and yet completely safe in that exposure. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The murmur of voices around us faded into a distant hum. It felt like we were the only two people in the world. At one point, he reached across the small table between us, picking up my half-empty wine glass. "You have so much to offer, Emily," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Don't ever let yourself forget that." His fingers brushed mine as he set the glass back down, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt through me, like static electricity. My breath caught in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird desperate to escape. I wanted to respond, to ask him what he meant, to tell him how his words affected me. But the words wouldn't come. My throat felt tight, my eyes misting over with an emotion I couldn't name: gratitude, longing, despair. I simply nodded, trying to compose myself, my gaze fixed on the flickering flames. That night, sleep was elusive. I lay awake, replaying every word, every look, every nuance of our conversation. The quiet intimacy of that evening had stripped away another layer of my carefully constructed defenses. I was falling, slowly, irrevocably, and the ground was nowhere in sight. The emotional confusion became a constant companion. Was this love? I had no idea what to call it. It wasn't the passionate, all-consuming fire of youth, nor was it the comfortable warmth of my marriage. It was something entirely different, a profound, aching tenderness, a deep sense of affinity, a feeling of being wholly, utterly understood. It felt like coming home to a place I didn't even know I'd been searching for. I started to see Daniel through a different lens, not with anger or resentment, but with a quiet sadness. He was a good man, a stable provider, a loving father, but the emotional chasm between us, which I had once dismissed as the natural evolution of a long-term relationship, now felt fast and undeniable. We had stopped seeing each other, truly seeing each other, years ago. We coexisted, we co-parented, but the sparks, the deep conversations, the quiet understanding had all faded into the background noise of life. Lucas never made any overt moves. He never crossed a line that could be called inappropriate. Our connection remained an unspoken, ethereal thing, woven into the fabric of our daily interactions. It existed in the lingering eye contact across a crowded room, in the shared smile over an inside joke, in the way we'd instinctively know what the other was thinking during a meeting. It was a language only we understood, a secret shared between souls. And that, in a way, made it even more potent, more dangerous, because there was no tangible evidence, no proof, only the searing evidence of my own heart. One late afternoon, about a year after he first started, Lucas walked into my office. The door was ajar, and I was staring out the window, lost in thought. He cleared his throat gently, and I turned, startled. "Everything all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I forced a smile. Just lost in thought, thinking about the kids. A partial truth. He leaned against the doorframe, his hands tucked into his pockets. "It's a lot, isn't it? Juggling everything." "It is," I agreed, my voice softer now. "Sometimes I feel like I'm constantly treading water, trying not to sink." He nodded slowly, his gaze empathetic. "I know the feeling. The weight of expectations. The quiet hum of needing to be everything for everyone." He paused, then added, "But Emily, you do it so well. You really do." His words, simple as they were, resonated deeply. They weren't a compliment about my work or my intelligence, but about my very being, my struggle, my endurance. He saw the effort beneath the surface, the silent strength it took to keep going. A sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion washed over me. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back fiercely, embarrassed by my sudden vulnerability. "Thank you, Lucas," I said, my voice barely a whisper. That means a lot." He didn't move, just stood there, watching me, his eyes gentle. The silence stretched, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement of everything we felt, everything we couldn't say. I could feel the energy between us, a raw, exposed nerve. It was agonizingly beautiful. Then he pushed off the doorframe. "Well," he said, his voice a little gruff, "I just wanted to make sure you had that report for the Miller project. It's on your desk now." He gestured to the corner of my desk where a folder now sat. I hadn't even noticed he'd placed it there. He turned and walked away, the moment broken, leaving me alone with the lingering echo of his words and the sudden acute emptiness in the room. That night, I went home and everything felt muted, dull. The vibrant colors I saw when Lucas was near seemed to drain away. I watched Daniel helping our son with his homework, his brow furrowed in concentration. I saw him, truly saw him, and felt a profound sadness, not for what he lacked, but for what we, as a couple, had lost. The connection, the understanding, the gentle intimacy that Lucas seemed to effortlessly offer was simply not present in my marriage anymore. and the crushing realization was that I hadn't even noticed it until Lucas's arrival. The next few months passed in a blur of meetings, deadlines, and the quiet, persistent thrum of my emotions. The unspoken bond between Lucas and me continued to deepen, becoming a silent anchor in my professional and personal life. He was the first person I'd look for when I arrived at work, the last person I'd mentally check on before leaving. His presence was a quiet comfort, his absence a subtle ache. Then, one Tuesday, about 2 years after he joined Synergy Solutions, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line read, "Announcement for management." My heart immediately sank. I knew with a chilling certainty what it would say. Lucas was leaving. He had accepted a position as creative director at a larger firm, in a different city, several states away. I read the email twice, 3 times, the words blurring into an unintelligible mess. My hands trembled. It was a purely professional announcement, full of corporate pleasantries and well wishes. There was no personal touch, no acknowledgement of the quiet world he had built with me. I felt a profound sense of loss, a grief so sharp it stole my breath.
It wasn't just the loss of a colleague, or even a friend. It was the loss of a silent promise, an unspoken future, a connection that had become so woven into the fabric of my daily existence that I couldn't imagine unpicking it. I didn't seek him out immediately. I couldn't. I sat at my desk, staring at the email, a hollow ache spreading through my chest. I felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the secret symphony we had played had suddenly been interrupted, leaving only a deafening silence. Later that day, he came to my office. His expression was a mixture of regret and determination. "You saw the email," he said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. I nodded, unable to meet his gaze. I focused on a stack of files on my desk, anything to avoid the intensity of his eyes. "It's a big opportunity, Emily," he continued, his voice softer now. "A chance for significant growth, both professionally and for Clara's schooling." I knew that. I understood the logic, but understanding did nothing to quell the ache in my heart. "I'm happy for you, Lucas," I managed. The words sounded brittle and false, even to my own ears. He stepped further into the room, coming closer to my desk. "I wanted to tell you personally." I finally looked up, my eyes brimming. "I know." His gaze held mine, deep and unwavering. "This has been a really special time working with you. You're incredibly talented, Emily, and you're a remarkable woman." His words hung in the air, weighted with everything left unsaid. My throat was tight, my eyes burning. I wanted to tell him how much he had changed my world, how his quiet presence had awakened something within me that I thought was long dead. I wanted to ask him if he felt it too, this profound, unspoken connection, but the words were trapped, choked by the fear of crossing a line that had for so long been sacredly maintained. "Thank you, Lucas," I whispered, the words barely audible. "You too. You taught me so much." It was the safest thing I could say, the only thing that felt appropriate for a colleague, even though it felt woefully inadequate for the depth of my feelings. He simply nodded, a slow, gentle movement. A shadow of sadness flickered in his eyes, or perhaps it was just a reflection of my own. Then he offered a small, poignant smile. "I'll miss working with you, Emily." "Me too," I said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down my cheek. I quickly wiped it away, mortified. He didn't acknowledge the tear, just held my gaze for another long, silent moment. It was a goodbye that transcended words, a silent acknowledgement of a shared private history. Then he turned and walked out of my office, out of my life, leaving behind an unbearable quiet. His last day was a blur. There were office farewells, a cake, polite handshakes. I maintained a facade of calm professionalism, forcing smiles, offering generic well wishes. When it was my turn to say goodbye, I just looked at him, our eyes locking for one final, unspoken moment. It felt like an entire conversation passed between us in that brief glance. Regret, understanding, a quiet farewell to a world only we had inhabited. I shook his hand, his grip firm and warm, and then he was gone. The days and weeks that followed were an adjustment, a slow, painful recalibration. The office felt emptier, quieter. I'd still catch myself looking towards his old desk, a flicker of expectation, before the cold reality would set in. The quiet moments in the break room felt desolate, the conference room meetings less engaging. The vibrant colors that Lucas had brought into my world slowly faded, leaving everything in shades of muted gray once more. I tried to focus on my work, on my family. I spent more time with Daniel, tried to reignite some of the old spark, but it felt forced, a hollow imitation of what I now knew was possible. The comparison was unfair, I knew, to both him and Lucas, but it was unavoidable. Lucas had inadvertently shown me what I had been missing, and now that I knew, I couldn't unknow it. The ending of our story isn't dramatic. There was no passionate declaration, no desperate plea for him to stay. Our connection remained what it always was, unspoken, hidden, a secret held close to the heart. He left, and life, as it always does, continued. But the emotional impact of those 2 years with Lucas has been profound and lasting. He awakened something within me, a part of myself I had neglected, a desire for a deeper, more resonant connection that I hadn't realized was starved. He showed me the woman I could be, the thoughts I could think, the feelings I could feel, even if those feelings existed in a liminal space of what if. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world outside is asleep, I still think of him. I wonder where he is, how Clara is doing, if he ever thinks of our shared silences, our knowing glances. I don't harbor any illusions. I know our connection was forged in a specific time and place, under a certain set of circumstances. It was a beautiful, painful, profound secret, and I've learned to live with it. To accept that some stories are meant to remain unfinished, their beauty lying precisely in their unfulfilled potential. Lucas taught me the quiet courage of vulnerability, the bittersweet joy of an unexpressed love, and the enduring power of emotional intimacy, even when it exists in the fragile, unspoken space between two people. My life now is still predictable in many ways. The coffee still brews at 6:30 a.m., the school run is still a morning ritual, and the office still hums with activity. But I am different.
I look at the world with a little more depth, listen with a little more intention, and live with a quiet understanding that the human heart is capable of holding vast, complex landscapes of emotion, some of which may never see the light of day, but are no less real, no less transformative, for existing only in the quiet corners of your mind. And that, I've realized, is a kind of peace.